After reading the disappointment that was Solo Leveling, I did not want to know anything about the franchise anymore. But knowing it had an ongoing sequel, I felt the obligation to at least give it a try. I really wasn't that enthusiastic about starting it after finishing the main story, since after reading the epilogue, I was conflicted. I feel like there was not much to add to its world, and that the sequel was going to be a repetition of the original story. So, I left it to be the opening video of this year, and as promised, the new year has come, and I went and read Solo Leveling Ragnarok. I went with my expectations completely low, and not really enthusiastic at all, but I was met with a very decent surprise. So, let's get this over with, starting with the story of Ragnarok is a rather simple one. The Outer Gods want to invade Earth and its entire dimension, and Zuho has to level up to help his father fight the Outer Gods. And honestly, before I picked up the manhwa, I already had a hunch the story will go in this direction. Since how the monarchs were defeated in the original story, in order to justify the sequel, I would imagine that they would have to face other absolute beings or even the rulers, though the rulers seemed the most unlikely due to how useless they were for the monarchs. Tarim is the big bad of the story, and I gotta say, if it would have gone the same route the original story did, with a generic evil attitude that can be summed up as I'm evil because I like destruction and nothing more with its villains, I do think I would have dropped this story by now, or have gone on another rant of how this sucks because it lacks originality and felt like a copy paste of Solo Leveling. I'm obviously pleased to say that this is not the case with the current main antagonist, but I'll get there in a moment. And even with the rather predictable setting for the sequel, this was not even the most of my worries. I still firmly believe that the world reset that the original story ended with was a very poor writing decision. Not only because the story really didn't need it, but the stakes that the entire story had just vanished like it really didn't matter at all. It wasn't a time traveling story to justify such an ending, it was just bad, a deus ex machina to give us a happy ending. Not only that, it gave the sequel the opportunity to reuse a lot of the original story's elements and just be a literal one-to-one of the main story with maybe some slight variations. Fortunately, even with a world reset, this is not fully the case. It definitely does reuse some elements, but it doesn't become a literal one-to-one. It decently changes a lot of the original elements and gives it a spin, like Suho's abilities. Given that these are the Shadow Monarch's powers, my assumption was seeing newest Shadow Soldiers and that would be it. But we not only get limitations to the original powers, we also get a unique power exclusive to Suho. The addition of the Shadow Tools, as I like to call them, was a rather unexpected surprise for me. Not only does it give a little more depth to the Shadow Monarch's powers, but it also gives the perfect opportunity to level up the other hunters. But he doesn't only have the Shadow Monarch's powers. Suho can use the powers of the Monarch's hairs. He still has access to the Shadow Soldiers, but they're very limited and have a time limit of 1 day. But getting back to the original topic, the plot, as simple as it seems, does carry out to be more entertaining and interesting than the original story. It explores a lot of the newer things this world has, as well as having a lot of exposition of the characters. My biggest complaint with Solo Leveling was that, for the most part, 90% of the side cast was pretty uninteresting. There was not much to rescue from them other than their designs and potential. Most of the S-rank heroes are just relevant for one single arc and that was the end of it. A rather good amount of build-up just to amount to the most basic and boring outcome to all of their characters that even Jin-woo was becoming such a bore to read through. And I eventually came to the conclusion that Jin-woo is written like this because he is really a self-insert character. You can't give him much of a personality before he becomes an actual character and becomes harder for teenagers to see themselves in Jinwoo. Not like that would stop them to begin with. So I came out pretty displeased with the characters as a whole, something that fortunately doesn't happen in Ragnarok. Sang Soo-ho is immediately presented to us as an actual character, a character that has a decent background to them that gets explored within later chapters. I'm glad that Soo-ho is not a direct one-on-one copy of Jinwoo, met with a rather rude, almost asshole-like attitude from him. And his character remains like this for the most part, even after his entire job change arc, where the story truly delves a lot more into his character and possibly one of my favorite parts in the story. His development doesn't start there though. It starts in the arc before this one, the Paju Field Raid arc. Another thing I generally disliked from the original story was just how uninteresting was Jinwoo's character arcs. Given the fact that he isn't really developed at all within the story other than him getting even more serious, most of his character arcs just seem lackluster. A big example being when he took out the lizards. When he was forced to kill by the system, the weight of that this scene could have carried would have been really amazing in developing him more as a character. But it really summed up to as, ooh, I forgot this was a kill or be killed world, ooh, I gotta kill now, and nothing remotely interesting comes after that other than just an edgy slash badass moment. This same mistake doesn't happen in Ragnarok, and it's not only the entire concept of killing fleshed out properly, the villain that Suho was battling with complements not only this exact development, but his lack of self. Something that was also being previously built up in the past arcs, paying off nicely in this battle. But it doesn't stay there, it further develops this exact lack of self in the arc after this one. This is how you make an interesting plot with your main character, and it's also this how you can properly complement character arcs with the villains of said story arcs. Lee Min-sung and Teal are better villains than all of Solo Leveling's villains combined. Lee Min-sung going from an uninteresting gag character in the original story to a villain that not only complements Suho's character arc, but also feels like a proper threat is a huge upgrade. Being the first big villain of this story, I gotta say, he was such a good villain. I was rather skeptical of his reappearance when I was first reading, but seeing just how much he truly complemented the story was a huge surprise. His narcissistic attitude combined with his unbreakable will and determination made for a really good villain. He is shown to be tied to the entire Stardust production and propagation, just because he wanted his driver dead. Pretty petty, pretty stupid, yet it's in character. He also complements in making the current main villain, Teal, really menacing. Stardust is used to boost the hunter's powers for a bit, but with the side effect of making anyone that consumes Stardust able to be mind controlled by Teal. Not only does this add a lot of stakes, given that we are shown that more pure Stardust can almost fully overtake an A-rank hunter, Teal has proven himself to be a rather interesting character. He is presented to be very loyal to Itarim and wouldn't defy him at all. Or would he? The second piece of Teal was shown to have a sense of free will like the creations of Earth's dimension, but him being blinded by his utmost loyalty to his god won't let him see that he can disobey his master too. I don't know where this will lead up to or if it was completely dropped after him decided to take his third piece, but it's nice to give your villains these steps to them. Ragnarok taking its time to flesh out its villains and really makes for a more interesting and engaging story, and complements absolutely everything about it. Now, this doesn't mean that everything is perfect in the story. There were certain things that I just disliked, not really hated, really just minor things, like the shadow key that unseals their previous world memories plot device. Having the opportunity to further reinforce the build your own path that the job change quest arc ended with, by making Suho not depend on his father's previous achievements to have the hunters by his side would have been a great follow-up from said arc. Sure, the plot would have moved slower, but it would have been a great way to further reinforce the message of the last arc, as well as the Huang brothers making the most boring comeback of all the comebacks in the story. Sure, they moved the opening arc of season 2 of Ragnarok, but that's it. Dong-suk did not even last in the story and Dong-su was again defeated pretty easily. Dong-suk at least served his purpose properly in the original story, but here he has nothing remarkable going for him, and Dong-su is an even bigger letdown. I can understand at least in the original story him standing no chance against Jinwoo given his power level at that point, but here I was expecting at least a longer and better fight, given that both of them should be at a very similar power level. Now, I know that their characters are meant to be portrayed as pathetic people with nothing going for them, but even that they don't do properly, and like I said in my manhwa review of the original story, they really just feel like dungeon bosses and nothing more. As well, the side characters have been a bit of a letdown. Now, disclaimer here, since the manhwa went on a hiatus right when they started to become relevant to the story. I don't have a very concrete opinion here, given that the story is actively releasing, so there definitely is a chance that I eat my own words here later on. But as of now, they're still as plain as it can get. Even with their reintroductions, even with their memory recovery scenes, they still don't feel interesting for me. But as I said, they also just became relevant to the story once again, So there is still a possibility that they get more development and small character arcs later on. Yeah, I know it still has the name solo leveling, but a prominent message in the story is that Suho doesn't need to be alone like his father. He can have the company of others to rise to the top, so I hope this doesn't just include the monarch's heirs, this also includes the other hunters. And finally, up to this point, I still don't see the reason for the world reset. Everything that this story has portrayed up to this point hasn't needed the world reset to function. And until the sequel gives us an element that needs the world reset to work, I will still stand that this was one of the worst writing decisions in the story. But overall, that's pretty much it. This is an ongoing story, so the plot right now feels average. It's definitely an upgrade from the original story, but it doesn't mean that I'm gonna call it one of the greatest pieces of media out there, since this could also be a case of that one quote that goes, get your expectations so low that when you do the bare minimum, it actually seems impressive. I do respect the risk that it takes, like the fact that it's not even adapted in the web novel of Ragnarok and made the final boss of the job chain quest arc his novel counterpart. Something I learned through the comments, and not gonna lie, I found that pretty cool, and it definitely feels like this story is far more polished than the original story. It definitely seems like the author saw the mistakes in the original story and improved on them in this sequel, and honestly, even if I started reading it with a bit of indifference, I came out of it enjoying Ragnarok. Not everything is perfect, but man, it's a great improvement, and I am decently excited to where the story can head to. Now, I do have one worry, due to the fact that I highly doubt Kyo can be surpassed as a villain in the story. Honestly, he has set the standard high for any other villain of the story to match him, given how his god has shown to fall on the ooh, I'm evil because I like it and nothing more to them, like the previous monarchs, where they genuinely felt like NPCs. Not even proper characters, just NPCs. But overall, it's definitely an improvement from the original story, and a step in the right direction. Solo leveling Ragnarok caught me by surprise, and I'm happy about that. It is a story that I can see having a lot of potential. I know I don't go much into the story as a whole. The video was originally going to summarize the manhwa until I realized it would have been a long ass video, so I just grabbed all the main points I had from my notes and compiled them into this video, and hopefully I got my point through. I have hope of where the story can go, and if I ever make another video about the solo leveling franchise, hopefully it's to praise the story again either once it ends or for X or Y reason. But for now, I'll leave it like this. 7 out of 10, let's see what you can cook for the future. My name is Noodlefucker, and all I have left to say is, like, subscribe, and good night.